And I was 15 years old, and I weighed about 90 pounds, and I walked into the station, and the guy said, "Can I help you?" I said, "Yeah, I'd like to get a job." He said, "What kind of a job are you looking for?" And I said, "Well, I'd like to be on the radio." Well, they had a good laugh over that, and he said, "Look, I don't really have a job for you on the radio, but I could give you a job as a gopher."
Welcome once again to the Talking Archive. I'm Josh Jacobs, and it's an honor to be talking today with Roger W. Morgan. He's a Hall of Fame broadcaster. And Raj, thanks for being with us today.
Man, what a kick to be on your podcast, Josh. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, thank you. And tell us about yourself growing up, where you grew up, and how you got into radio.
I grew up in Salem, Oregon. Actually, when I was younger, when I was in my very early teens, I was living on a cattle ranch in eastern Oregon, grew up on a farm, and the only connection with what I do now and what I was doing back then is the fact that my father was a rodeo announcer and a pretty celebrated rodeo announcer. He announced the Pendleton Roundup and the big California Rodeo in Salinas and the biggest rodeos in America, Madison Square Garden. So I grew up in the shadow of a big cowboy with a great big voice. And I listened to that voice, and I guess like a lot of other kids, I always kind of dreamed of growing up and being like my dad. So that's where the early bug came into my life, urging me to get into some kind of broadcasting.
And what was your dad's name, by the way?
My dad's name was Mel Lambert. And if you Google him, you'll find a rich history. He was pals with some of my heroes when I was very young. And that proved to be a big bonus to me when I was going to school. So I grew up with friends, including Roy Rogers, Gene Autry, and cowboy star Rex Allen, who also is one of the greatest voices in America and voiced all those early Walt Disney nature films. Mm-hmm. And Rex is actually my godfather. So I grew up being able to tell kids at school that I was good friends with Roy Rogers and Gene Autry, and it always gave me a special stage when I was in school, and they had the return to school after summer vacation every year, and they'd say, "What did you do over the summer?" I said, "I hung out with Roy Rogers and Gene Autry." I had an immediate audience, Josh.
Wow. And Rex Allen, of course, was also the voice of the dad in the original GE Carousel Progress, which was first at the New York World's Fair and eventually at Disneyland for its 1967 makeover of Tomorrowland. And
pretty darn amazing. You know that, Josh. A lot of people I mentioned Rex Allen to, and they go, I don't remember Rex that well. He was the last of the silver screen cowboys and a great inspiration in my life. He was the guy who came along and urged me to stay with broadcasting and gave me some great tips. Nice guy.
In fact, his son Rex Allen Jr. Gave an interview to the Extinct Attractions Club, which was around about 20 years ago, where somebody put together these different films of people that they took at Disneyland and put into a DVD and interviewed all these Disney legends. Unfortunately, by the time he got into this line of work, Rex had passed away, but his son was there to share some memories of working at Disney. And so how often did you get to go to Disneyland yourself, growing up around Rex Allen?
Well, I did grow up around Rex Allen. Before I ever saw Disneyland, I was a good friend of Rex Allen. And just, cowboy heroes at that time in my life were not only stars and movie stars and actors, but they were a great influence on the life of young people. I miss that era where the stars that we enjoyed as kids really were good people and healthy leaders for us as we were growing up and kind of establishing our own values in life.
That's right. And with Roy Rogers and Dale Evans, tell us about how you got to meet that couple. They were together for many, many years.
Met Roy Rogers and Gene Autry, again, through my father. Many of the rodeos that my father announced over the years when I was very young, Roy Rogers and Gene Autry were the guest stars at the rodeos. As a matter of fact, Gene Autry actually produced a lot of rodeos, and he was always a guest star, and he would bring with him another Western star. And I remember as a very small child, I saw a rodeo with guest stars Gene Autry and Gail Davis, who played Annie Oakley on TV. I'm impressed with your level of knowledge about these people, Josh. You are one of the guys that has responded knowing some facts about these people. That's good.
Well, thank you. And Gene Autry owned two prominent radio stations, one up in the Bay Area, KSFO, and he also owned 710 KMPC in Southern California. Did you get the chance to visit those radio stations when you were growing up?
I never got a chance to visit them, but this is kind of a funny story, I think. When I met Gene Autry first when I was probably about 11, and we were at a rodeo in Salt Lake City, Days of 47 Rodeo. It was produced by the Mormons in Salt Lake City, big rodeo, and Gene Autry was there, and I was so thrilled to be standing with him and knowing him and meeting he and Gail Davis, who was playing Annie Oakley at the time on TV, and so I had a photograph taken with Gene. And I was always really proud of the photograph. Well, years later, when I was in my early 20s and had already established myself for quite a while in radio, I thought what a kick it would be to work for one of Gene Autry's stations. And I've got a connection with him, so I might have an opportunity to do that. So I sent the picture along to Gene Autry, and I said, Gene, I really enjoyed meeting you. And I'd love to get into radio with you, and just thought you might enjoy seeing this picture that we had taken some time ago. Well, he wrote back. He signed the picture, and he wrote back, "Hi, little saddle partner. I'm so glad to hear from you. When you get older and you want to get into radio, you contact me, and I'll make sure you get a job." It was like time had not passed for Gene. He looked at the picture and thought I was still 11, but that was my last contact with Gene Autry. I never visited the radio stations that he had, but he had one in Portland also. And Gene is well known by a lot of the Pacific Northwest radio people as being really an outstanding radio broadcaster and a wealthy man. Owned the A's baseball team.
That's right, yeah. California Angels many years.
Yeah.
In fact, what happened was the story behind that was originally the Dodgers, when they first moved to Los Angeles, were on 710 KMPC, but then they went to 64 KFI back in 1961. Autry did not like that, so he said, I'm going to buy my own baseball team and put it on KMPC. So he bought the Pacific Coast Angels, and that year in 1962, there happened to be an expansion with several new teams, including the new Washington Senators, which the old ones became the Twins, and then the Angels, the Los Angeles Angels, were the original, was the other team. And so the first 4 seasons they actually played at Dodger Stadium, but they called it Chavez Ravine on the air whenever the Angels played at home, quote unquote, until they got Anaheim Stadium in 1966.
What a background you have! Again, you're a wealth of information.
Thanks. Now, tell us about your first radio job.
When I was 15, some of my buddies were getting cars. They were beginning to buy cars, and at age 16, you can get a driver's license to drive. And gosh, I had traveled around with my dad a lot, and I knew a lot of kids of the Cowboy stars. I knew Rex Jr., who I called Chico at the time. Chico Allen was a good friend of mine, and they were getting cars, and so I went to my dad, and I said, Dad, I'd really like to get a car. And he said, what kind of car do you want? And I said, I think I'd like to have a Chevelle. And he said, do you know how much money they cost? I said, no, I really don't know how much money they cost, but I sure would love to have one. He said, well, how are you going to pay for it? And I thought, wait a minute. I thought that was what dads were for. You're supposed to buy that car. And he said, no, you've got to go out and get a job and learn how to pay for your own car. And so I got on my bicycle and I rode down the street kind of looking for places that I might work. Remember, I went to the farm store in Salem, Oregon, and they didn't have a job for me, and I rode my bicycle down the street, and I came to a radio station in a great big field about a mile from my home. It's a great call letters, KGAY, K-Gay Radio. I pulled into the parking lot at K-Gay, and I walked in. I was 15 years old, and I weighed about 90 pounds, and I walked into the station, and the guy said, can I help you? I said, yeah, I'd like to get a job. He said, what kind of a job are you looking for? And I said, well, I'd like to be on the radio. Well, they had a good laugh over that, and he said, look, I don't really have a job for you on the radio, but I could give you a job as a gopher. And I said, I don't really know what a gopher does. He said, you just go for things that we need and do things that we need to have done. And I said, heck, if this is a break to get into radio, I'll do it. So I got a job. I don't remember how much it paid, very little. But I was going into the station every day, and I would burn the teletype paper that the news came in on. I would run errands for the guys on the air. I never got into the control room, so I never really was up close and personal with the equipment. Mm-hmm. But I did observe a lot of things that were going on at the station. One day, while I was out in the field burning trash, I came back into the building, and that building, when I had stepped out to burn the cash, had about 15 people working in the office, including the guys on the air. Came back in, and they were all gone. It was like a spaceship had picked them up and just swooped them away. I couldn't figure out what had happened. And one little guy came walking around the corner who I'd never seen before. And he said to me, "Who are you and what are you doing?" I said, I told him my name, and I said, I'm just doing whatever needs to be done. He said, "Have you ever worked on the air before?" And I kind of glanced around. I knew there was not another soul in that building. And I said, "Why do you ask?" And he said, "Because I need somebody to go on the air. I fired all the other people." And I'm thinking to myself, this could be the greatest break of my life. I've never been allowed in that control room. He said, "Do you know how to operate the control room?" I said, "Yep, I can do it." And he took me in that control room and turned me loose, and that was my first experience being on the air. I had no idea other than what I had observed those guys doing. He got in his car and drove away, and I was a radio broadcaster from that point forward. Horribly ragged, just didn't know where I was headed. Called my mom on the phone and said, "Quick, turn the radio on. What you hear on KGAY, that's me. I'm on the air." And all I was doing was playing records, putting a record on one turntable, putting a record on the next turntable, and I learned how to segue one into the other. I thought, man, I am well on my way. And then my mother said to me, you really have to say something. She called me back, said, I really have a hard time believing you're on the air. You're going to need to say something. And so I thought, well, I'll do a newscast. I've been burning that teletype paper. So I picked up the teletype paper, and there was a 5-minute news summary on it. Mm-hmm. And I thought to myself, well, I'll just do the news. And I had heard an intro that one of the news guys had done before. He said, "And now news, headlines, and highlights." And I thought, that's a simple introduction. I'll just do that introduction. And now news, headlines, and highlights. The song ended. I popped that microphone open, and the first words out of my mouth were now news, highlights, and headlights. And I went, oh, my God, I know something's wrong here, but I don't know what it was. So I repeated it and repeated it about 5 times in a row with my heart pounding in my chest. And that was my horrible beginning in radio back in 1957.
Now, what was the format of KGAY?
Everything. In the morning, they played what we would now call elevator music, just a mixture of, I remember some of the artists, Helmut Zacharias and, oh my God, Hugo Montenegro, and a little bit of everything. At 12 noon, they began a country format, straight country, and they segued into that format. And so all I had to do was do the early part of the day. From sign on, it was a daylight station, so it was only on during daylight hours. So I would go in at daylight, which, depending upon the time of the year, could be as early as 5:30 or maybe 6, and then I'd go till noon. Then I'd turn it over to just playing music. They had it on big reels of tape country music, and so the owner came in and said, "We kind of like what you're doing. We'd like you to do the country format. So what we really want you to do is we'd like for you to change your name at that point and become a different personality." Oh, Josh, really, when I tell the story, I think back about what a horrible experience that would have been for anybody, but I did it. I changed my name to Lonesome Larry, and I played cowboy music for the rest of the day until sign-off. So I was the only jock on the air for quite a while, for several months, at KGAY in Salem, under my real name and under the name Lonesome Larry.
I'm like imagining wearing these cowboy boots and having stirrups on and full
I felt
cowboy
good about
garb.
it, because I've been raised around the Cowboys. I felt right at home with that. but it was a little bit embarrassing. I'm going to school, and somebody said to me one day, "You know what? I listened to Lonesome Larry on KGAY, and he sounded a lot like you. Are you Lonesome Larry?" I said, "No." He said, "Well, then answer the other question. Are you on in the morning over there?" I said, "Yes, I am." And so it's just a series of wild mistakes.
Now, how long were you on KGAY?
I was on KGAY for about 4 months when I got a phone call from this really adds to the confusion of this story. I get a call from KBZY in Salem. That was the #1 rock radio station. They called me and said, "Look, we've heard you on the air. We need somebody to come on the air with us. We would like to hire you, but we can't use that name you're using on the air, Lonesome Larry." That's the only name they thought was associated with me. They didn't associate my real name with being on the air in the morning. Mm-hmm. So I said, "Well, I would definitely like to do that." They said, "We'll put you on at night. We want to call you Jim Hunter." So for 2 additional months, I did mornings at KGAY under my name. I did afternoons under the name of Lonesome Larry, and at night from 7 till midnight, I went on KBZY in Salem as Jim Hunter. There I was, daily on 2 radio stations under 3 different names.
Wow.
And I was at KBZY for quite a while before I got a call from a station in Bend, Oregon. And the station in Bend, Oregon, KGRL, called and said, "Look, we've heard you. We enjoy hearing you on the radio. We think you're pretty good. We'd like to have you come over to Bend and maybe consider being our program director." So I went to Bend, Oregon. And I was there for about 6 months when I got a call from Steve Brown, who was their national program director at KISN in Portland. He called me up and said, "Look, we'd like to put you on the air at Kissin in Portland." That was probably my greatest break in radio.
The 90 Wonderful Kissin.
90 Wonderful KISN. Kissin Good Guy. And believe me, Josh, that was big time for a kid who had previously been himself, Lonesome Larry, Jim Hunter, and just kind of wrestling his way through getting on the air and understanding what it was all about, to moving into what at that time was as big as it could get in the Pacific Northwest. I mean, that was a great break.
We're talking with radio personality Roger W. Morgan, and next time he discusses where he went after the 90 Wonderful Kissin in the Pacific Northwest.